And I believe, I'm just going to triple check, yeah, slightly different lineups overall with the Brute Demon Hunter from Felkeine instead of the Warlock, but the rest of the lineup with the Rogue and Mage from Floki is the same as what Felkeine has access to, so not too much of a surprise to just see Hunter go first, see if he can grab a quick win and then move on from there.
Pretty ugly opening hand, as to be said there for Falcane. Spectral Sight on the left can fix some things, but that Lion's Frenzy is going to function as a blocker very, very soon in the near future. Really tear away the option for playing Outcast cards from the left-hand side unless the Glide is going to come into play anytime soon. Meanwhile, Frenetic's hand is a little bit slower, but actually honestly not that bad because it involves the card Cult Neophyte, and you can give me probably just about any card that involves the card Cult Neophyte in this matchup, and I will bite your hand off, particularly if it's closely followed by a second one.
What about two Cult Neophytes? Can interest you in that, along with an adorable Infestation to go on top of that? Like, looks pretty good, honestly.
An Andorran Infestation?
Yeah.
I don't know. Frenetic is Spanish. It's fine. How has he done this through a Neophyte? Hang on. He just double discounted Crimson Sigil Runner. Obviously, only the first one is outcastable right now, but that's Brute down to 0. Double Jump is Brute down to 1. Sorry, down. Yeah, other way around.
1 and 0. I got you.
Idea. What?
Wait, hang on. Subtle, be quiet. You were wrong. Am I doing it right?
Yeah, you got it.
Wow, this is suddenly a very different story. And you can see Frenetic lean forward. It's like, what? This doesn't happen versus Neophyte. But I guess it does now. And I think he has to just ship this in, right?
Problem is, what's the plan at that point? Because even the 2 Crimson Sigil Runners are contesting the other 3/2 Neophyte on the other side of the board.
Well,
I have to say,
just coin Rhino out just to kill it.
Yeah, okay, I mean, I guess. I don't really have a better plan for you, I've got to admit, but I think Frenetic's probably just going to coin Kodobane at this point and just try and reset from there. Maybe even like Warsong Wrangler coin Wolpertinger.
I grow impatient.
It's tricky here how to just get rid of this 6/7 on the board. I'm just trying to just glance at things and work out if there's a realistic way that both of these Neophytes die this turn without the Brute trading into them.
Impatient.
Because that's the fear, right? If the Neophytes get cleaned up and the Brute's just still a 6/7, that's very scary indeed.
Yeah, for sure. It would require the Soul Shear, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine. Which there are 2 copies of in Falcane's deck, but even then, because you played Cult Neophyte, it has to be literally like in the hand right now. It's not a card that can really be cycled into effectively and played down. I don't mind the lack of attack.
It's going to be Wolpertinger.
Yeah.
Makes sense, again, against Brute Demon Hunter. It's unlike its Fel and OTK counterparts, where the AoE just isn't really there at all. There is those Soul Shares, but that's about it in terms of actual removal from hand.
Spirit Jailer a welcome pickup, but that Lion's Frenzy is being annoying. As I was describing earlier, perhaps not quite in the way I was imagining, but honestly, in a lot of aggro matchups, an outcast philosophy on a Spirit Jailer is actually good enough some of the time, right? Just get a bunch of Soul Fragments in the deck and play some 2/4s. But because he can't really effectively get the philosophy outcast because of that Lion's Frenzy, it's a lot less effective this turn.
It is, but he can still go Soul Share on the 4/3, play the Jailer anyway, and just hero power down one of the Wolpertingers. I think that's still a reasonable play. And what's good for Falcane here, he isn't playing a turn necessarily in a setup to a Rhino, because obviously he knows the Wrangler picked up a Wolpertinger, so it's not like he's expecting a 7-attack Rhino to come flying in next turn.
Yeah, we didn't talk too much about the choice to take Wolpertinger. Like, I liked it, and my instincts lay there as well. But with 1 Rhino in hand, the opportunity to draw 2 7-attack Rhinos does seem pretty promising, right? When you're facing down that Brute on the other side. But firstly, if you'd just seen that happen, Falcane would have played differently, perhaps used some of the health on his Brute to begin with. Secondly, it's just not really a good way to spend 5 mana, is it? Just trading straight through one of your opponent's taunt when you're not even picking up a value trade. So I think in the end, this strategy from Frenetic of just trying to build a board to punch through it the hard way does make a lot more sense. And you can see because of that, he has done so. The 4-drop that he played on the previous turn, the card that he spent 4 mana on, has just stuck to the board and started hitting face, which is, you know, a benefit he has gained by just throwing tempo onto the board as opposed to focusing on dealing with the Brute. So I like the way he went about it, didn't panic, has kind of re-established a little bit of dominance here in the mid-game.
And interestingly enough here, if Felkeine knew Frenetic's hand, he would glide, I imagine, but I think because it's more... because Falcane's more staring at his own hand, which is worth gliding in my opinion, so he kind of gets a win-win here.
Yeah, agreed, 100%.
Puts the Barrack back in hand, of course, in deck, sorry, for Frenetic, which I think was the biggest deal there. The Rhino's nice, but I think the Barrack for the refill was going to be the problem.
And this time, there's the interaction I was talking about specifically. He got it to line up absolutely perfectly there with the discounts on the Spirit Jailers and the Philosophy, can throw them all out, get a bunch more Soul Fragments in deck, get a bunch of tempo, and even have the mana to squeeze in a Hero Power as well. Really like.
A good response available here, though, for Frenetic. He can go for Wrangler number 2 into Rhino, unless he draws it right now, and then still go Wriggling Horror to continue the value trades. Looks pretty solid, because then he has like Rhino Hero Power 1-drop for the next 2 turns.
True. Interesting again, though, as to whether he wants to fight for board more aggressively. He could still go... There's still a Wolpertinger left as well, right? So he can still go... Oh! There's still a Marcel Cub as well. Did not even consider that one. But yes, there's still a Wolpertinger in there as well, so he could fight for board a lot more aggressively with the Wolpers this turn if he wanted to go for that. But maybe at this point it is just damage efficiency now with the Trampling Rhino, because... No, he's going to go for it again.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, I was just looking at it because you also get the Wriggling Horror in, which allows the Wrangler to start trading away the 2/4s, which are, I'll put it in like the threats, I guess, that are on the board.
Sure.
These don't trade very well into Wolpertingers though, so that's a bonus.
Mm-hmm.
Great lethal, question mark?
With no Kurtrus, I'd love to see it, but I don't think it's going to happen somehow. That's interesting. That's a 6-card glide. I think I've ever done that, but I'm pretty sure it will go off in that order, right? Where the glide will happen first and then 2 cards will get added to it?
I would guess so, yeah. The only weird thing is it draws Frenetic a card.
True.
Which is maybe not what he's after at this point. But then again, what is Falcane after in general? He's facing down a very wide board, something that this Demon Hunter does not deal with very well. Gonna go for quest progression.
Yeah, quest completion also gets 5 attack on the Lion's Frenzy. It looks like he's just going to ship that damage as well and try and set up on the race. We haven't been paying too much attention to the amount of damage that has been pushed through from Falcane, but he does not need an awful lot next turn now.
He has Acrobatics
get there with the Lion's Frenzy.
Glide next turn, right? It's not half bad.
Yeah, so 1 card draw at the start of the turn, it's 1 attack, 2 draws off Acrobatics, that's 3, 4 off Glide, that's 7. Hero Power is 8.
So interesting, he didn't just ship the the second Jailer to face, right?
Yeah.
Unless he just thinks he can get more with Kurtrus Acrobatics. You think he could be eyeing that up?
Yeah, but no, for sure. You know, I was counting the guaranteed outs from what we can see, but I think on average you will tend to save more mana with the Kurtrus, especially when you have 3 mana to start after the turn. Brute is not a great draw in terms of immediately getting lethal, though. Yikes? Question mark? Like, it's not great, but it's not necessarily the worst outcome.
Oh, that'll help.
There is that Soul Fragment, though, that he needs. Soul Fragment number 2 going in, that's 6 draws, and now the Glide coming through for 10. Whoa.
just about got there for Felkeine, and like I was talking about before we got into this match, I hope he's feeling a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more relaxed going into it. And I don't think Felkeine will ever look comfortable all the time, because he just has that way about him on camera that he likes to move a lot and react a lot. But I think this was a very well planned out game, even though it looked a little bit dicey, because Frenetic, I think, responded to the Brute very well. So Felkeine was under a lot of pressure, but I think he had the right approach there, and it paid off for him, just grabbing that win with just kind of weirdly pushing a lot of early game damage somehow.
So, yeah, somehow. Can't think what did that. It wasn't the 6-7 he played on turn 3 or anything. That's not what got there. Yeah, but it was a ridiculous outcome in the end, it's got to be said, because it was the Acrobatics hitting 2 0-mana Sigil Runners, which, sorry, not the Acrobatics, but the quest completion discounting the 2 Sigil Runners to the point they cost 0 and were playable in the same turn, which just allowed such an early Brute. Even though it was just one Brute, sometimes against Face Hunter, that can prove to be enough, especially when the hand was a little bit on the slow side, which it was for Frenetic. His hand relied quite heavily on disruption, and through that disruption, Falcane was still able to play a Brute on turn 3, right? Which meant in the end, the hand did absolutely nothing from Frenetic's side. So tough loss for him to take, but he will move on now to aggro deck number 2. He is going to be rocking the Shadow Priest now against the Brute Demon Hunter instead.
Yeah, and this is, again, it's really difficult to overly analyze, especially aggro matchups versus Brute Demon Hunter, because it relies on so heavily whether they get early Brutes down or not. But if the Brutes aren't there, I feel like Priest can just run rampant in this matchup, because without Brutes, there's just not a great way for the Demon Hunter to actually kill minions of Priest, and Priest goes wide very early on, of course.
This is a very promising hand for, well, both players actually, but I'm looking specifically at Falcane's right now, because he does have that Philosophy Spirit Jailer interaction that I was talking about, which can allow him just to win board early, as you might just see here.
But on the other side, Frenetic has Ganling Imp Coin, which means they turn 3 Ganling into an additional 4/4 at minimum. And the big deal with that is around the time you see early Brutes, and especially if there's only one, that's a good way for Priest to actually punch through without losing too much in the process.
Frenetic considering a diversion here to the Twilight Deceptor instead, and does so to pick up that Raised Dead. Obviously, Raised Dead immediately increases the potential power of a Gandling turn because of the way that interaction works with any minions you play with Gandling actually being destroyed and put in the Raised Dead pool. So if you do it with Desk Imp, for example, you can just Raise Dead another Desk Imp straight back on the same turn. That lines him up potentially for that.
And he's going to get an Orc Merchant as well, and to me, that's just a good enough Raised Dead this turn.
Yeah, shake of the head from Falcane. With the way that he's played this is the hand that he didn't want to see, because now he's spent everything in his hand basically on making a couple of irrelevant 2/4s, right? Whereas he could have held on, used the card draw instead, perhaps use that Philosophy to get 0-mana Brutes down. That happens later, but it does interact with this board that Falcane's made a lot better. So now his way out of this is just to hit Soul Fragments on these turns and be able to get Brutes down nice and cheap. He has a couple of double jump outs for Philosophies here to be able to cheapen this down. And duplicate the Brute. Spectral Sight just a little bit too expensive, but he can cheat the 1 mana he needs with the Illidari Studies. Yep.
Is it ever Chaos Leech?
No way, right?
Okay.
1 mana, draw 2, play a 6/7 taunt. Has to be better. Soul Fragments coming through are a big deal. Doesn't quite get there in the end, though. There was, like, weird outs, for example, where he drew 2 Soul Fragments there off that draw step, and then would have completed another quest stage, potentially discounted more cards in hand. One of those could have been Philosophy, for example, and then more Brutes are coming down, but just a little bit short in the end.
Kind of. Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, like, it was interesting that, for example, Frenetic could have Wriggling Horrid Hero powered that turn and just traded 1 in and then traded away on board and still felt safe. did not matter. I think you can just see from the way the game went. We spotted it right at the start. The turn 3 Ganling play, especially with the Raised Dead edition, was so strong that unless Felkeine went off a lot in that early game, he was going to be very behind. And as you quite rightly pointed out, Felkeine chose to take the approach of, if he plays anything but this style of opening, I'm going to feel fantastic. 2/4s on the board. Great versus Priest. That's what you want. But it just didn't line up too well. And a very rapid loss, which means Frenetic evens up the series. And Falcane is going to very quickly jump over to his Rogue, leaving the Mage till last, Subtle.
Yeah, and I don't think really Falcane's lineup is in a great spot overall against Shadow Priest, right after the ban of the Shaman comes in. I think, Frenetic is in a good spot with the bans coming in this series in general, because he's playing double aggro and there's only really one anti-aggro on the other side. Unless you're going to consider Brute Demon Hunter an anti-aggro deck, because you just draw double Brute on turn 3 every game of your life, but that's not really the reality. We've had this argument once already, right, about how we feel about this matchup, and surprisingly, my opinion on the matter has not changed within the last 10 minutes or so. So the fact this is the counter queue for Falcane in this spot is probably not a great feeling for him overall, and neither, I imagine, is your wireless mouse running out of battery mid-game in Grandmasters.
Yep. Luckily, Falcane, the master of preparation here, as he just plugs it in pretty easily. So I'm glad that was solved in a easy fashion. Oh, Sol, I think we've seen this game before.
No. This game has one key difference, because that hand also has an Octobot in it, which the hand was very sorely missed from Floki. However, there's another difference in that there's a freaking Void Touch attendant on the other side of the board, which is going to be able to rush this down very effectively.
Didn't even hit the hand.
Nope.
Frenetic might look a little bit strange to some extent, but I like it. You forgo just 2 damage to phase to actually make the Octo not go potentially very insane with additional card reduction. So Falcane also just respecting the Void Attendant. It's painful to kill it early because you have to, but you're just terrified of Raised Dead the turn after. It's so grim.
Decent draw in the end for Frenetic. I think Hero Power was largely going to be earmarked there, so there weren't too many things that would go with it very nicely. Like even if Tour Guide were found there, right, it would be a weird turn to use a Tour Guide. Yeah. So I think Divine Shield on the Neophyte was about as good a pickup as you could get there to go alongside the Hero Power. However, speaking of good pickups, that is one of the best in the deck for Falcane at this point.
Do you think he's okay with just playing it out and maybe killing off the 2/1 and that's going to be the plan, or do you think he'll want to actually proc it and do something with it this turn, if use it at all, Subtle?
If use it at all is an interesting proposition to me, because there is a chance to just rip Shroud here and just be a greedy little boy. Yeah, I kind of respect this from Falcane. Obviously, you have outs because, yes, exactly those kind of cards can appear to you. And now if you want, you can choose to use one of those on this turn to kill the 2/1. Since they have stealth as well, they'll be able to contest the 3/1 very nicely next turn.
Don't use the Divine Shield on the Divine Shield.
For my discretion.
Yeah, I think interestingly, I would have just killed the 2/1 and left the Divine Shield 3/1 up, and just kept more value for the Octobot field contact turn next turn. But Falcane's just saying, okay, I'm winning board this turn, which I think is a very valid way to go about it as well.
And I guess as well with that Secret Passage, we might even see him delay even longer, right? Because he can Secret Passage next turn, depending on what his options are, and then really have some mana for the turn after if he wants to go with the Octo proc. Ooh, good pickup. Means it's likely we are going to see field contact number 1 just a brain freeze, if anything else, right? Like just the fact he can brain freeze away this vicious reader going on there. So
this is such a good turn. You see the reaction to it as well. I think 2 turns down the line, I see this is very actually nicely panned out from Falcane. Get control of the board on 1 turn, so to make sure he's able to keep the board completely clear, going into this turn 2 turns later, where he now has a Divine Shield on his field contact, which is a dynamic I was talking about the previous time we were watching this matchup. These are the spots where it's very, very difficult to come back if you are the Priest, because how do you deal with this situation? No Guardian Org Merchant found there off the Raised Dead either. Not that it would have made too much of a difference, but he does find it off the second one, and now with the ping first. The Org Merchant, he is able to take care of it. He might feel like he's found a bit of wiggle room now. But unfortunately, as I was saying, it's not going to make too much of a difference here because Felkeine still has the second one locked, loaded, ready to go in hand with another Octobot for discount potential as well.
Only tricky part here is he can't proc the Octo as of this second in time. I wonder where he goes here. Do you think it can potentially be like Cult Neophyte Swindle just to fill up again and just try and go wider than Frenetic's Priest here?
Yeah, I can see that. I think I would start with one deep
fair.
over
Okay.
Swindle. Yeah, just looking for potentially any extra removal that you can pick up here.
Yeah, I guess...
Rune Door, Ignite, First Flame is the absolute nuts when you pick it up in an anti-aggro matchup as rogues. You can just go First Flame, Second Flame with the 2 remaining mana.
I had Plunder in my mind, but Plunder wouldn't have been particularly great off the Swindle that turn anyway. There's nothing great you want to kill, no Shadow Steps in hand, so yeah, I think you're completely right with that. And so is Felkeine.
It was like Guardian Org Merchant number 12, so this game.
A good card. Double Neophyte to try and really reduce Felkaine's options next turn, but even with Double Neophyte, it's only really 1 to an extent, of course, with the Octo proc.
Well, not the turn you wanted to get Neophyted, though, it has to be said.
Not, but again, is it ever, like, proc? Ah, he will want to Swindle, won't he, before he procs? I was thinking like proc, Oasis, ally, Brain Freeze.
You could also choose to go proc, Secret Passage, have 4 mana to spend on stuff, or the play that I do really like making perhaps a little bit too much, Secret Passage first, then proc, and hope you just get some insane dumpable hand off the other side from the Secret Passage. Instead, he's just going to take as high a tempo a turn as he can here with the Oasis ally. And he's just going to close his eyes and pray. And this is what I see. And this is what I'm talking about, Raven. Like, this is my experience in the matchup. Falcane had the dream, right? He had everything you could possibly need to fight back on board. The field contact even had Divine Shield. But Frenetic has just managed to engineer himself back into this position where he's just in such high control of the matchup. And now this second field contact turn is going to have to be incredibly impressive.
I think it will be. I've got faith.
Okay, you believe?
I will say that the double Neophyte and the double Raised Dead so early on with good minions in the pool, you know, helps this out a lot, right? Although this isn't looking too bad.
Flurry is huge, but it hit the Taunt minion, which obviously is the most likely minion to die because it's where the attacks can go, and the other lowest attack minion on board. Right. The strictly worst outcome
to step in
that position.
They've got a lot of mana to play around with, though.
Yep. Prep, okay. Prep Shroud.
Care to make a wager, friend? Choose soon.
Okay.
There's the Prize Plunderer, okay. Down to 0 because of that Foxy Fraud on the previous turn. Shadow Step coming down, Prize Plunderer again. This is the kind of huge turn I was talking about. This is exactly it. It's getting pretty close.
That's an upgrade.
Oh, finished on Divine Shield. Obviously, the field contact's dead if Frenetic chooses, but still. Just one card in deck.
There's one card left.
Lethal! And honestly, not a lot for Frenetic to do. And if he feels like he has to trade, which I think is a reasonable thing to do, once he trades at 1 minion away, the next minion he trades into is going to spawn a 3/6.
True. Yeah, only really the first trade does anything relevant here.
You have to read this one.
tempting to say that killing the field contact would deny you from just getting OTK'd this turn with the Garrots, but honestly it wouldn't.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't, because there's no cards left in deck, and you know your opponent still has Prep Swindle available, right? So I don't think there's any way to prevent yourself from getting killed this turn.
Yeah, and like I was saying, this is just how I see this matchup play out, with Rogue popping off. And
Yeah. Yeah, chalk one up for Team Raven. The field contact turn was indeed insane to the level it needed to be.
there's the secret. More bad news for Frenetic. And I think it's fair to say he just knows he's dead.
You're paying for my discretion.
How much is even on board right now? 3, 5, 6, 9, 10. So yeah, just Garrots and Swindles. Plenty to get this done.
What a game. I mean, that looked grim for quite a while, but that one turn from Felkeine, that turn that basically got him to the bottom of his deck out of nowhere, just pulled him all the way back. The Plunderer being the key piece in that puzzle, obviously with the Shadow Step, being able to kill off enough threats to make it worthwhile and keep Felkeine safe. And I do love a good Garrett Rogue turn that starts with the player walking away.
Dude, Chair is the best Garrot Rogue player in the world. Chair has 100% win rate with this deck. You never see Chair lose a game. Honestly, the rest of our GMs should take some lessons from that guy. But yeah, it was a very good performance overall. I think there from Falcane, kept a cool head. I think greeded when it was correct to greed, like with the Shroud turn, picking up the Divine Shield minions. But then also, at that point, I was continuing to be greedy. I wanted to hold a little bit. But Felkeine at that point said, okay, that's enough greed, and then full tempoed out. That turn there exactly, where he won the board with the Prize Plunderer and the Ethereal Org Merchant, and then leveraged that next turn to have a Divine Shield field contact on board against nothing, which is a very hard situation for the Priest to come back from. Despite that, Frenetic was able to get into a very dominant-looking position, but then the second field contact turn was just so insane from Falcane that was just nothing in the end that Frenetic was going to be able to do. I don't know why I'm struggling so much. They're not that similar, but for some reason I keep wanting to call them the wrong name.
They're similar enough. They start with an F. We are going to go back to this matchup as well, though. One I'm excited to see some more of at least, which is this huge sort of super fast Delete Warlock from Frenetic, a deck that he looked to be extremely comfortable with. So I imagine he's put a lot of time into this deck, even though it is probably, if not one of the newest decks we even have in the game right now. He's going to be going up against Rogue, of course, from Felkeine, because that's simply how Last Hero Standing works.
That is just the rules.
And not bad opener from Frenetic, I'm going to say there, Sottle. Not bad.
Yeah, not bad from Falcane either, though, because he does have the field contact available, which is job number 1 achieved.
I do like the similarities and differences between the two decks, because we're like, oh, not a bad hand. Like Rune Mithril Rod and Backfire with the coin seems good. And then on Rogue, not a bad hand. Field contact. It's like, oh.
Am I wrong?
No, I'm not saying you're wrong at all. It's just hilarious.
Yeah. Now the double Backfire has joined the party for Frenetic, though. Very interested to see where this Golem is going. It's going to be a 1 cost, it appears. But was slightly wondering whether Falcane ever goes Tempo King there, because the rest of his hand is so high quality in terms of cycle. Like, it doesn't seem like he's going to be short on card draw for the first field contact. But the thing is, the Golem, even when it's taken this early, is sometimes still even planning 5 turns down the line for the second field contact that kills your opponent sometimes, right? And Falcane just not really valuing any form of tempo in this matchup, understands that it's just a straight up race to the bottom of the deck, I think, between the two. So taking a 1-mana Battle Cry Golem, I think, was all that was on Falcane's mind that turn.
Yeah, this is where the numbers game kicks in, though, for Frenetic on this Warlock, because look at the reduction in the hand, and he's got plenty more where that came from. 2 1-mana Pantharas, 1 Backfire still in hand, what will soon to be a 0-mana Cult Neophyte against Rogue, and we've seen the tricky situations Cult Neophyte can create for this Rogue deck.
Efficient is sufficient.
Give me that.
Initiating overdrive.
Falcane saying that is enough in the end, just barely scraping the Octobot. Foxy, Swindle, and the Octobot itself, of course, coming down before the prize plunderer that turn. But Falcane just cashing out his discounts here. And again, you know, we talked a lot about the similarities between the deck. When you watch it plan out, you know, both build up a big hand, and they have ways to discount it down very cheaply. Then they have their big pop-off turns where they draw 1 million cards in one turn. And then, you know, there's one extra step for the Rogue where once they get to Fatigue, they put some cards into the deck before they draw them all out to kill the opponent. Frenetic's cards are already in the deck. They just read Fatigue on them, and he just put those out of the deck to be able to finish the job.
He already has a deck full of bleeds.
Exactly. They are remarkably similar when it comes down to it.
Yeah, this is about as off a turn as you're going to get in this Warlock deck, and goes back to what we talked about earlier, is whenever you have to Soul Rend for a reasonable amount of mana, your turn is normally going to be a little bit lackluster in terms of the card draw, but now double Matron at 2, double 0 mana Panthara, it's going to speed back up again very quickly. Does he just stop and go Intellect here? Okay. I'm going to pull back the Golem.
Muzzle their magic.
What do you think about that Shadow Step? Do you think that was worthwhile?
I mean, he wanted to keep cycling, right? Like first off, Falcane chose to go in this turn on a Neophyte turn, which he didn't necessarily need to do. Secondly, the Shadow Step on the Golem instead of the Wand Thief there, so, you know, not picking up additional resources from the Wand Thief along the way is also kind of interesting, but, you know, hand space issues can come into that. But I think the big question is, like, whether that turn did enough in the first place because of the Neophyte coming down. But you can also argue, well, my opponent's deck has the ability to play Cult Neophyte every turn for the rest of the game from this point. So maybe this is just the reality that I have to accept and just go in and just do what I can to blow through Cult Neophyte.
Yeah, and the issue is, right, if Cult Neophyte literally stops you taking a turn in the game, then that's even stronger, right? So I guess you do have to just ignore it to an extent. Look at the card draw. It never ends.
3 cards remaining in deck for Frenetic, but he is, I believe, 0 out of 8 on final quest step. Which is less than ideal. He does have 0 mana Unstable Shadow Blast in his hand, though, which could catch him up real quick at this point, and as Raven is quite handily demonstrating for us. No card draw left remaining outside of that one Mortal Coil, but no big card draw effects left remaining in the deck. Backfires or hands does have that one hand in hand to be able to finish this off. Falcane had a very effective turn here himself with the discount, but having now thrown his remaining field contact back into his deck, he is going to be setting up for the lethal on the following turn, so it's going to be up to Frenetic as to whether he can do something approaching lethal this turn. I'm not entirely sure he can get there.
Yeah, and important to note as well, no Tamsin for Frenetic this time. So he can't do any of the crazy Tamsin things, whether that's Unstable Shadow Bolts or Hand of Guldans or Drain Souls. Like, none of that's really available for him now, because I believe it was burnt from a Soul Rend.
Yep, sounds right.
Muzzle their magic.
Cult Neophyte probably the best shot for Frenetic at this point. Because even if he went, Life Tap, Unstable Shadow Blast, that's still only 7 damage, and he was 0 out of 8 at the start of the turn, so wouldn't have quite got there onto quest completion. Even then, if he'd have done that, that kind of eats up most of his turn, and there's also hand size considerations about not burning Tamsin 2 in that situation as well.
Yeah, I wonder if he's even going to look at Drain Soul and then coil his own 1/1 here. The Fatigue itself, although dangerous at this point, will help him get to Tamsin quicker, right? If he's actually just taking Fatigue, then he can save the Hand of Gul'dan for potential lethal.
Well, he's on 2 out of 8 right now, so I imagine he thinks that he can get there with Unstable Shadow Blast. Although I suppose ticking for Fatigue for 1 could have been relevant, because then he just needs Blast to do 5 for 0 mana, and he can play the Tamsin. So yeah, it might have been worth in that spot.
I wonder.
And just uses up the mana as well, right? Like, it still costs 1, there are no reductions there, so Coils still cost him 1. He floated 1, just a thought.
Oh, he thinks he has it. I'm assuming...
Ooh.
Okay.
I'm almost out of cards.
You're
The
paying
Ethereal
for
Org
my
Merchant.
discretion.
I'm out of cards.
Ethereal Org Merchant, and then is he saying that he gets there just with the one Garrote that he can cast? Yep, that makes sense to me.
Only 16, innit?
Yep.
Looks
Yeah,
like
very nicely done, very nicely
yeah.
recognized. I started that turn, I was still, tunneled on the idea of, okay, well, field contact plus the 2-mana Garrote plus the 4-mana Garrote, that's already 8 mana. Prep does nothing because it's double neophyte, so we're not achieving anything this turn. But Felkeine recognized that just with the one Garrote that had already been discounted and cost 2, he could get there with the sources of 4 damage going through. Very, very nicely recognized for Felkeine. And what a way in the end to take down a week, a huge week in the end for Falcane as well. Just getting there in the race. Garrote Rogue, one of the hardest decks to play in the metagame right now, and I think a very, very clean performance with the deck overall from Falcane.
Yeah, I'm really happy for Felkeine here for multiple reasons, of course. One, he needed a big week, and he got a big week. That must feel fantastic and at least put some level of relief for him going forward in Grandmasters. But also, he looked so much better in this match, to me at least, than he did in the previous match earlier today. So I'm really glad he looked, a little bit more in control. Obviously, he's still Felkeine, so there's still going to be a lot of movement going around. But his play just looked way more solid and way more comfortable, right? Like you said, he kind of just instantly knew it would be fine. He knew it would be enough. The previous game, when he looked like he was under a lot of pressure, he was greedy when he should have been greedy. He then went off when he felt like he needed to, and that paid off for him. So yeah, just really happy for Falcane overall. And again, just to shout out quickly to Frenetic, although he didn't win, he is doing very well in Grandmasters overall. So he's still got to be pretty chuffed at second place, honestly.
Yes, and in typical fashion as well, Falcane makes a rude gesture towards all the casters and say, congratulations, all of you picked someone who wasn't me, and I have made you all look like idiots. So congratulations to Falcane for picking up the victory there once again. Again, I think great way to recover, great thing to, silence some of the doubters who had questions about his previous performance. And again, I want to reiterate, that semi-final that he played, I think the biggest problem was just his own headspace, because even some of the things where he was like, oh, what am I doing? What was that play? Like, a lot of the time, the play was fine, or there was
I couldn't work out what was wrong.
Yeah, like obviously sometimes there were errors in there. Sometimes I think he was just getting frustrated with himself because the game in general just wasn't going the way he went, but it was a much more calmer, composed, very clean play from Falcane coming into this, and you can see right there what that means. Leapfrogging everyone, leapfrogging Yala up to 6 points now to take his spot in a comfortable 9th place, being able to create a little bit of separation between the relegation zone and himself. That's a huge performance from Falcane, but also the story on the other side, which we didn't focus on too much, is that Frenetic has been able to open a lead on Gabby yet again in that fight for the top, which does still seem to be a little bit of a 2-horse race at the moment. But again, we always talk about it. RDU, Bunny, Psycho, if they can get a big 5-point week under their belts, suddenly they can introduce themselves into that conversation as well. But for now, that does seem to be the battle at the top between those two players, whereas the players that came into this week struggling are now struggling even more, because a lot of the players around them, Letta, Casey, Felkeine, Floki even, have picked up big points this week, which means that gap is just starting to open up now between the relegation zone and the players above it.
Yeah, Wama, Tice, Boston, and J4 in that danger zone. But we've seen the difference a week can make, right? Felkeine was really at the bottom of the danger zone going into this week. One strong week, a strong victory, getting those 5 points. By no means safe, but a lot more comfortable. We might get a few extra winks of sleep this week before next week kicks off. So, it can make a big difference on the week-by-week performance, but also when you look at the Frenetic, the Gabby, even when you look at Psycho, Bunny, and so on, like, even if they have another bad week, something terrible needs to happen for the next 3 for them to feel under threat of relegation. Obviously, we can talk about top 8 for playoffs a little bit differently as well. But overall, a good week for some players, and maybe a wake-up call for some of the others now that have been pushed into that bottom 4.
Yeah, absolutely. And now